Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday edition. I'm John Delano. We're just a few days away from the calendar turning to 2020. But the 2020 election season is already in full swing. On Thursday, the Democrats held presidential debate number 6, and there will be 4 more by the end of February. The field of candidates is narrowing down, but will the Democrats end up nominating someone that everyone in the party can get behind? And what does it all mean for President Trump's chances at re-election? Here to help us better understand the race are 2 guests from the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Kristen Kantak is an associate professor of political science, and we are joined again by Dr. Laura Putnam, Pitt's history chair. She also writes about grassroots political organizing in Western PA. And I'm joined alongside by Julian Routh of the Post-Gazette. Hey, welcome again. Good to have everybody here. Kristen, let me start with you. This part of the state, Western Pennsylvania, is must win, is it not, for both candidates, whomever they are on the Democratic side, in this presidential year?
It is incredibly important. Yeah, and I think part of it is geography. We're close to Ohio, which is another really important state to win. But these are kind of the suburban Pittsburgh neighborhoods are where this race is going to be won and lost. And the other issue you were talking before about activists is getting activists to get their voters to come out. So who's excited in Western Pennsylvania could be the thing that determines the next president.
Well, Julian and I have been at every single Trump event in Western Pennsylvania. This guy is unbelievable at turning out a crowd. He gets huge numbers of people, far exceeding anything I've seen by any of these Democratic candidates. Do the Democrats have a chance against President Trump in this region? Laura?
So I think there are 2 questions: how the Democrats are going to do at the presidential level in Southwest PA in 2020 in former Democratic strongholds, where the Democratic percentage of the vote at the presidential level has actually been declining since 1990.
Right.
And so the fact that it continued to declining in 2016 was really impactful, but also not really surprising. That line has been going really consistently. And we've seen that that voter turn moving down ballot pretty steadily. And of course, the 2019 results in this area, where
right.
we had county councils flip in a lot of areas, counties that had been one-time Democratic strongholds, industrial strongholds. That would tell a mixed story about how Democrats are doing in Southwest Pennsylvania and in the parts of Northeast Pennsylvania that look like it. Of course, the flip side is that in upscale suburbs, which had been the center of that, country club Republican core of Pennsylvania politics, of Republican Pennsylvania politics, so the whole Philly collar, and also parts of sort of demographically similar areas of Allegheny County and so on, all of those places are moving strongly towards the Democrats. And that was true in 2016, and it was true in 2018, and it was true at the congressional level and at the state house level.
So that might offset what's happening out in the outlying counties. Julian?
There was a story in the Philadelphia Inquirer the other day where a bunch of prominent Pennsylvania had said, after Super Tuesday, Pennsylvania might be the center of the political world because there's such a contested race. What would you encourage the Democratic candidates at this point to do when it comes to Pennsylvania? And are you seeing any candidates doing that?
I think the candidates right now are pretty preoccupied with Iowa and New Hampshire, so we're seeing them a little bit. Pete Buttigieg, for example, has this. His strategy is just with those 2 states, so we haven't seen him really at all. I think if it continues to be a race by the time we get to Pennsylvania, absolutely. I mean, this is the state that we kind of forget about this. In 2008, sort of put Hillary Clinton over the top. And so we could end up being kind of the kingmakers. I mean, in 2008, it was pretty clear that Hillary Clinton was going to win before here. But we could be the deciders in this one.
Do you really think so? You think Pennsylvania can make the difference? Our primary is not until April 28th. And the vast majority of the delegates will be chosen before then, because this time in 2020, unlike 2016, California, with its huge number of delegates, is voting before we are. So do you really think it could come down to Pennsylvania?
My own sense is that Pennsylvania is unlikely to be decisive in the primary process, in part because Pennsylvania so reflects the United States of America in different chunks and pieces inside, really, except for the lower Latino population, although that's been changing in recent years. So Pennsylvania looks more and more like a microcosm of the country as a whole in many ways. That's why it's the swing state. But that also means that no single primary candidate has a resounding majority here. You have got supporters of the more sort of populist or more left-wing primary candidates for the Democrats. You've got a lot of supporters for more centrist, those voters in the Philly-Collier County who've been voting moderate Republican for a while and now seem pretty firmly switched to the Democrats are a more natural constituency for the more moderate candidates.
Which of all these Democrats is the best one to win Pennsylvania, in your view, Kristen?
That's a tough question. I think, given what we know now, I would have to give the edge to Joe Biden. He is someone who has spent a long time trying to build up his Pennsylvania bona fides, and
he's a Scranton boy,
right? Exactly,
and
he and people in Pennsylvania tend to like him. It's a long way, right, as you said, before our election comes up. So a lot could happen between now and then in terms of some other candidate really kind of taking fire or something like that. But I think at this point, the safe money is on Biden.
Well, let me push you a little bit. Besides Joe Biden, who's next on your list as a good candidate for Pennsylvania among the Democrats?
I think I've seen Elizabeth Warren do the warmth thing in a way that I think would play quite well here in Pennsylvania. I think that Indiana, in a lot of ways, is somewhat similar to Pennsylvania, and so you might see, and Buttigieg is an amazingly kind of smart candidate.
Yeah, Rhodes Scholar.
Right, exactly. So I think I could see any of them doing pretty well. I know Medicare for All is not popular in Pennsylvania, even among Democratic voters. And so that would kind of, I think that would hurt Bernie Sanders or even Elizabeth Warren. So you might see, Klobuchar did well last night. If she takes off, she might do well here.
Laura, do you line up with your colleague?
Yeah, I think any of the candidates who were on stage last night has a path in Pennsylvania. They would just be different paths. Some of them would rely more heavily on those new suburbs that have just come over to the Democrats. Some would be able maybe to pull a few more votes from those old strongholds. Some would maybe tap into a little some of the ongoing rural populism that's a real current within South Central Pennsylvania and some other parts of the North. So they all have possible paths. They're just different paths.
Yes. Go ahead, Julie.
I want to get a little ultra specific here, but there's been a little political battle here in Western Pennsylvania over fracking, over petrochemical, with the plant down in Beaver County. You mentioned Medicare for All not being very popular here. What about fracking when it comes to the issues with some of the more progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren who oppose fracking altogether, maybe a more centrist candidate?
Well, I think fracking is one of those issues, and it's important to keep in mind when you're thinking about an individual deciding to get up in the morning and go vote for a particular candidate. And so when you look at an issue like fracking, it can matter in terms of how people think about candidates, but really the question is, who is that going to matter for whether or not they actually get up and cast the vote? And I would suspect not that many that would specifically be dealing with the fracking issue. Outside of their communities that are more likely to make money out of fracking, those are people who are going to be more moderate anyway, right? And so they're going to be more likely to go for the more moderate candidates anyway. So I would suspect that particular issue might not make that much of a difference.
Well, after all, Governor Wolf, who was reelected, favors fracking, but he'll argue that he has imposed the environmental safeguards so that fracking is safe in Pennsylvania. Now, I know there's a whole lot of folks who might disagree with that, but it didn't seem to hurt him in his election. I think the energy issues are really important in this election. I also think trade issues matter. And the president, when he campaigned in 2016, was always talking about China and about trade. And I think a lot of folks, he would make a difference. Has he been able to do what you think the folks in Pennsylvania want him to do on trade, Laura?
Well, if what people wanted was to actually have increasing jobs in industry, the answer is no, right? Across not just Pennsylvania, but Wisconsin, Michigan, these critical states where in hard-hit areas that have faced deindustrialization, there was sort of support for that vision that maybe Trump could bring the mines back, could bring the factories back. The exact industries that he most heavily spoke about as being central to that vision have, faced a huge, really significant job cuts as factories have closed, facing the uncertainty of the trade wars.
We only have 60 seconds left. What's the key to the president's re-election in Pennsylvania, to winning Pennsylvania? Kristen?
I think a lot of it is going to be about turnout. Are Republican voters going to go out and support him in a state where there's no Senate election?
Laura?
I think labor is one of the keys, but I think we need to expand our vision of who counts as labor. We should be thinking about educators, we should be thinking about nurses, we should be thinking about folks in the healthcare sector. Those are all pieces of organized labor, and the degree of enthusiasm that they bring for the Democratic candidate is going to be really important.
And I'm going to end by asking Julian, because he's also an expert on this stuff. What do you think is the key for President Trump winning this election?
I think the key probably comes down to whether or not people believe the Republican messaging on the economy. Obviously, there's a lot of facts, a lot of opinions being offered by some of the Republicans on the economy. It's whether or not that message came across to people in their living rooms.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to actually three factors. I think it comes down to African-American turnout, particularly in Philadelphia, to offset whatever happens in the counties of Western Pennsylvania. I think it comes down to suburban women. We've talked about that and how important suburban women are. And I think the third factor, frankly, are white working class folks out in the hinterlands of Pennsylvania, whether they will stick with President Trump as they did back in 2016. So that's my instant analysis. And I think we've run out of time. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll be back in a moment when the KDPG Sunday edition continues. Stick with us.